Hello, one and all, and welcome back to the Medal of Honor Talking About Shit series, where we're gonna be apparently diving into every single Medal of Honor game now that I've committed myself to European Assault, probably the most generic video game ever devised. For a World War II shooter, you might as well have just called it Man Shooty Bang Bang or something about that. Probably even fit for a Call of Duty game at this point in time, at least then it would show that maybe they're gonna make a funny comedic game to break through their mold. But European Assault, Jesus fucking Christ, you couldn't come up with anything better than that. It's World War II, of course it's a European Assault. Oh, but we're going all over the entire war this time. That's freaking every World War II game. But the main reason why I did want to talk about this was for a couple of things on down the line. One particular thing in the gameplay and the ending level where they're going to combine into the Super Friends of Talking Points. But we do have to objectively start with talking about this game. So, what's it about? Well, it's the generic World War II game. It's the bottom line standard for what you should expect from a World War II game, with all the bells and whistles that have been added into over the years of Medal of Honor-ness. Last time, they started doing some squad-based development, and that has definitely been carried over from Pacific Assault, and I wouldn't be surprised, considering that this was the console game that was coming around the time, that the PC-exclusive Pacific Assault was that these games are carbon copies of each other. So you do have a squad, you can order them around, and you do have to, rather than them healing you, it's the other way around, where you have to keep them going, which is kind of a weird twist to go on, because having the squad there to back you up is a lot better since you're kind of the player character, you're more important than them. Whereas an AI dumbfuck squad of like 5 people is not exactly going to be that helpful. You can order them forward to take some shots, but again, they're AI controlled, so they're about as reliable as a rubber duck holding an AK-47. They do get their shots in, but they're not going to make or break an all-out battle, especially when we get to the other problem with the game at its core. You do go through a couple of scenarios. You do go to North Africa, where you're going to be disassembling the Axis tank corps. You do go to Russia and try to help out with their complete fucked over scenario. And you will eventually go into Berlin. You'll go into some of the Western Europe. I don't know if it's France, Belgium, or wherever the hell they decided to land, but you go through some generic European ruined cities. And speaking of that, basically everything you're going to see in this video has been done before, and the main talking point is that this game should be overall skipped. Like, this is the most mediocre of mediocre boilerplate video games. If EA couldn't sit down and come up with something more creative than European Assault for a World War II game, then just disregard everything. The most that it has going for it, like the highest part of it, is that it looks nice. They put in some effort in the visuals. Like, the battlegrounds look fine, the weapons look like they're top-notch for 2005. It looks like they're running an engine that's a bit more above the average. But again, it's rendering stuff that does not break the mold and is just falling into this trench of shit that the genre had eventually become, and there's nothing here that makes it stand out. Again, I would like to bring up the competitor Rising Sun from a couple years earlier for just how off-the-wall, scenario-based weirdness that the game had to really stand out, and the fact that I continue to talk about it. They put a little bit more effort into the cutscenes. You only get to see like 5 of them throughout the game, but they do have some character, they do build up some scenarios, they do prep you for the mission you're going to go on, which is pretty good considering that they're, again, the most standard goddamn things that you're supposed to do. Like previous games where we were able to use a camera to capture classified intel. We had to ram a train through something, we had to steal a covert spy plane. Here, we're just falling back into kill important individual guy, burn a bunch of shit, set dynamite all over the place, and rescue or find certain allies across the battlefield. This is kind of what they're trying to use as a unique selling point, which it completely fails because, again, all of the freaking objectives are just contextual button-based shit that we've seen before. Nowadays it's kind of laughable, but back in the time they might have sold this as a different sort of shooter. It's more of a sandbox element sort of shooter where they opened up the battlefield. They introduced alternate paths that you can go down. There's like 2 of them per mission, but they do exist. And considering that each mission has about 6 objectives in it, there's a lot to bite into. It's a bit more dense than your usual FPS. But again, what's the point when there's no narrative thread that's really captivating? There's no characters to focus on. The fronts split your characters anyway, so we just end up with the Call of Duty problem where you're constantly just getting shoveled in a whole bunch of a cycle of new, completely boring and non-existent protagonists throughout the entire runtime as you switch from field to field, where, at least in the original, early Medal of Honor games, we stuck with one guy, and they could have used that to build some sort of character arc, and they usually never did, but it had potential. Here, there's not even a potential for that, and the overall narrative structure is more just that usual thing that World War II shooters tend to fall into. It's basically story time with Grandpa, where we talk about how he apparently was in every front in every part of World War II, because he's the one narrating the intro cutscenes, where we also get added into, again, that tired trope where we get commander dialogue intro stuff to establish a story. It doesn't fucking work because there is no goddamn story. All they're doing is just the goddamn plot points and the objectives. We don't have a story arc to even latch onto. Then they have to lean back on the gameplay, where it's just completely stock standard sort of stuff. You do get a bigger suite of weapons. You do get the usual bolt action rifles, a machine gun. I think you have access to a shotgun. We get a sniper rifle later, the heavy ordnance, grenades. We get to throw dynamite around. It's a whole big swath, which is really useful considering where this game goes through every front. So we're going to be seeing every side of this, which means that having that many weapons is kind of necessary, and at least it's good that they focused on that sort of stuff. The shooting works how you should, the enemies behave how they're supposed to be. It's just very stock standard. We're still running on health bars, gladly, as I've talked about before. Another thing that they did add into the gameplay to differentiate it is that they did add in a bullet time temporary mechanic where you can activate it, and everything slows down to like 25% speed, so, you know, just in case you're bored of the game or you're in a tough spot, you do have access to that, on top of the squad-based mechanics, on top of the multiple objectives, and all that good stuff. Like, it's a bigger FPS, but without a story, without a character, it doesn't matter, and that's what I've always said, and European Assault here is a perfect example of why I say that, is that the only thing that you can really do, since the FPS development gameplay has just become a solved game at this point, and there's nothing special about it unless you really try, the only thing that you can do, and you can still do a lot with World War II, to build a story, to build some characters, as Battlefield would have eventually led us on to believe is possible in games like Battlefield 1, you can do something to differentiate your game, and the only way to really smash through the genre grayness is a story and characters. This game doesn't have that. But on top of that, it doesn't really have an interesting story in of itself anyway, because the tone that they decided to set for this is that it's not patriotic, it's not inspirational, it's honestly just bleak and a little bit dark. Because what they focus on is more people. It's more setting the scenarios in the dark. We're going in under stealthy circumstances. People get blown up. Squads get abandoned. You know, people will get shot on screen and that sort of stuff. So it's a bit more of a bleak game, but it's not so bleak that it's interesting to talk about like what Attack on Titan did in its early episodes, where it was that fucking concrete bleak. This is just a little bit bleak on top of a war story, which is perfectly appropriate because, again, it's World War II. Of course, people are gonna die, people are gonna get wounded in combat and all that, and your plans are gonna get completely fucked and all that sort of stuff. It's all perfectly normal, which is the problem. It's falling into the generic trap that this game has. It's just everything we've seen before. Nothing differentiates it, nothing makes it interesting to talk about. And so, that's kind of why I wanted to make this like 10-15 minute video, which is kind of why I've been talking quickly and try to rattle all this stuff off, is because I just want to completely reaffirm just the nothingness here. This is the white noise of games, but the reason I did want to talk about it is that on top of this game's other problem, it's just way too difficult of a shooter. It's got checkpoint problems where it's like you got 2 checkpoints per mission, so if you fuck up or you get in a tough spot, you're getting thrown back like 15 minutes. This game, like, objectively is kind of short. My total amount of footage is just under 6 hours, which is perfectly appropriate for a shooter. But the reason why it's that long even in the first place is because of this difficulty problem. This constant resetting and having to redo a mission and throwing out like 10-15 minutes of progress, because this is a console shooter, so you don't even get the option to quick save through all these problems. You just have to deal with them. There are enemies everywhere. They have pretty good above average eyesight, so they're shooting you in the ass. And since you're moving as a squad, you can't even do like some sort of stealth option to get around these problems. So the enemy's always going to know where you are, and you're just going to have to try and battlefield tactics their way around them, which they have inbuilt behaviors to counteract. Or the battlefield is helping them out by close quarterings you, or just having cover literally everywhere. Or maybe introducing this one goddamn snipers, so you have to start memorizing that too. Or it's just the sheer amount of soldiers that you just have to cut through and all that good stuff. Like the final mission is again, a normal Medal of Honor thing that it does, is that it has the ridiculous whack-ass final mission where we're invading and destroying a nuclear facility. Which, again, is crazy, but it's normal crazy. It's not really interesting to talk about. Like, of course it always ends with destroying their nukes. Hell, I think one of the original, like, Spielberg Medal of Honor games had us completely destroying a V2 rocket. This stuff's been done for over 10 years at this point. But that final mission was the reason why I wanted to talk about this, because holy shit, like, I think I got stuck in, like, the final shootout in the mission for, like, a half hour. Just constantly railroading you, blindsiding you with enemies with very little cover and very little resources to even deal with it. Like, you'll just be swamped by like immediately 6 guys. They're all coming out shooting and they're all just getting headshots right out of the go, to the point where you're just trying to prone, trying to like hide behind any box. Like, the ridiculous amount of anal shit that you have to deal with in order to get through this mission, to like tighten up your goddamn movement to the very step of where you need to be just to get through this, because it's that ridiculously overpowering of a combat section, which we will get to when we eventually talk about Heroes 2, because the same thing happened there, but worse, if you can believe that. Like, getting to the point where you have to be on the tower and have the exact amount of time formulated to get around all the enemies, and then you move up, shoot them when they're spawning so that they can't get any hits on you. It's that fucking absurd of a final mission. It's long too. Like, thankfully that checkpoint was right before that fight in of itself. Or maybe I just save stated there, but holy effing balls, that is just absurdly difficult. And again, it goes to my point that mush all this wasted effort together, I wouldn't even imagine this game would clock in at 4 hours. Like 4.5. That's how much time was spent constantly resetting these missions. There's not a lot of content here, even in spite of the content being completely recycled by a half dozen other games, probably in this same franchise. And that's what I really wanted to get to, is just like the most generic game that you could possibly imagine, killed down by just stupidly obtuse difficulty. The checkpoints are completely useless, okay? So this is definitely one of those games where there's no shame in save stating through your problems. But then again, there's no story. What did they even make this game for? Was this game literally just made as a pairing to Pacific Assault, where even though that game is boring, like even though Pacific Assault is boring and there's no reason to really play it with its one goddamn type of battlefield, I mean, at least European Assault makes up for that we're going from the winter no man's land to the desert of death. Like, at least there's variety there, but half the time or a third of the time you're like running through just abandoned ruined cities that we've seen ever since the PlayStation came out. So ultimately, just avoid this fucking game. There's no point in playing it or even remembering it or even seeing it. It's glad that it's been preserved for future generations to just be annoyed at it, but there's no reason to actually care about it. There's no reason for me to have made a 16-minute video about it. Just avoid it at all costs. There are way better World War II shooters out there that actually give a half a damn. And it looks like EA just made like a fucking brightly colored cardboard box and released it as a video game. European Assault. Might as well have just called it Medal of Honor World War II shooter. Great job, EA LA, if you even exist anymore. Maybe you're DICE nowadays. That would be a horrible way to go out.